What happens when a diver dies, but not from drowning? That's the part nobody talks about, not the panic, not the slow horror of something failing deep below, just a name, a depth, and a date. But in these stories, the water wasn't the killer, and in this video, you'll see how even the best, fully trained, perfectly prepared, still never made it back. 3 divers, 3 nightmare dives, and not one of them resurfaced. On November 5, 1983, the semi-submersible rig Byford Dolphin was stationed in the North Sea, working in the Frigg gas field. Saturation diving operations were underway, one of the most dangerous jobs on Earth. These divers lived for weeks inside a pressurized chamber to match the crushing depths of the sea, allowing them to work far below the surface without suffering decompression sickness every time they returned. That day, 4 men were inside the system: Edwin Coward, Roy Lucas, Björn Guyver Bergersen, and Truls Hellevik. They were supported by 2 dive tenders, William Crammond and Martin Saunders. For the team, this was routine. A diving bell would bring the active divers back from the sea floor. The pressure between the bell and the chamber system would then be equalized, the connection sealed, and the divers transferred. But on this day, something didn't go according to plan. Hellevik and Bergersen had just returned from the sea floor and were inside Chamber 1. Coward and Lucas were resting in Chamber 2. The next step should have been simple: decompress the diving bell, confirm the hatch was sealed, then detach the clamp connecting it to the chamber system. But the clamp was released too soon, before the inner hatch was closed and before the pressures were equalized. In less than 1/10 of a second, the pressure inside the chambers dropped from 9 atmospheres to 1. That's like being yanked out of the deep ocean and into open air instantly, without protection. The result was catastrophic. Hellevik, who stood closest to the opening, suffered the most horrific fate. The sudden rush of air forced his entire body through an opening no wider than 24 inches. He was dismembered instantly, his limbs, organs, and tissue torn apart by the explosive decompression. Parts of his remains were found scattered throughout the chamber room. The other 3 divers died instantly from barotrauma, their blood vaporized, their lungs destroyed, their tissues torn from within as expanding gases ripped through them. The 2 tenders, Crammond and Saunders, were also severely injured. One survived, the other did not. It was the worst diving accident in saturation diving history, not because the divers went too deep, not because of faulty oxygen, but because someone made a procedural error, an unlocked clamp, a misunderstood signal, a moment of human failure. An investigation later found that the chamber system lacked key safety features. There were no interlocks, nothing mechanical to prevent the clamp from being opened while pressurized. The technology existed, it just wasn't installed. This, more than anything else, sealed the diver's fate. What makes the Byford Dolphin catastrophe so terrifying is how quickly it happened. There was no warning, no margin for error. 1 second they were alive, talking, doing their jobs. The next, they were gone. And while this was the result of a single catastrophic second, our next story unfolded over agonizing minutes, where narrow rock, black water, and suffocating silence claimed 2 lives, even as their teammates fought to save them. In the winter of 2014, 5 of Finland's most skilled cave divers arrived in Norway with a goal that only a handful of people in history had ever completed: an underwater traverse of Plura Grotta, or Plura Cave. Located deep in the icy wilderness of Nordland County, this underwater cave system was no ordinary dive. It was one of the deepest and longest in Northern Europe, with tight passages, freezing water, and a notorious history among the cave diving community. The team, Patrick Grönqvist, Jari Huotarinen, Jari Usimaki, Kai Kankinen, and Vesa Rautinen, were well aware of the risks. All 5 were highly experienced in technical diving and had planned this mission for months. They trained for every scenario, triple-checked their equipment, and rehearsed the route meticulously. The plan was to enter through the ice-covered Plura Lake, travel roughly 2.3 kilometers through submerged limestone tunnels, and exit through the dry Steinugelflaget cave on the other side. At its deepest point, the dive would reach nearly 130 meters. It was a terrifying challenge, but not beyond their capabilities. On February 6, 2014, they began the dive. At first, everything went as expected. The team followed their guideline, moved in formation, and used hand signals and light flashes to communicate in the dark. The water temperature hovered near freezing, but they were insulated in dry suits and equipped with rebreathers to conserve gas. They carried backup lights, redundant breathing systems, and emergency tools. Every move was calculated. But deep inside the cave, the unforgiving nature of Plura made its presence known. Roughly 130 meters into the dive, the team entered a tight, sloping restriction, one of the most dangerous parts of the route. It was the kind of passage that required divers to remove their gear, push it ahead, and wiggle forward inch by inch. The visibility was decent when the lead diver entered, but within moments, everything began to collapse. Jari Huotarinen, one of the lead divers, became stuck. His tank or part of his gear had lodged against the rock. As he tried to maneuver out, his struggle kicked up silt from the floor, creating a swirling, blinding fog that instantly erased visibility for everyone behind him. Panic was not immediate, but the stress built quickly. Jari Usimaki, who had already made it through the restriction, realized something was wrong and turned back to help. He couldn't see, but he could hear Huotarinen's breathing rate spike through the rebreather loop. In these moments, every breath counts, and every second lost can mean death. Usimaki did what few would dare. He tried to free Huotarinen, feeling around in the zero-visibility cloud, searching for the obstruction by touch. But the space was too tight, the angle was wrong, and Huotarinen was fading fast. The more he struggled, the more oxygen he consumed. It's possible he was hit by carbon dioxide buildup, a deadly condition called hypercapnia, or even succumbed to panic. Eventually, his breathing stopped. Usimaki was left alone in the dark, knowing his friend had just died inches away. The rest of the team waited in the passage behind them, watching the delay stretch from seconds into minutes. They had no visibility and no information. Communication was impossible in the narrow tunnel. Finally, Usimaki, overwhelmed by cold, stress, and exertion, began to deteriorate himself. He tried to retreat, but never made it back out. Somewhere in the restriction, he too stopped moving. Two of the world's most experienced cave divers were now dead, within arm's reach of one another. The three remaining divers, Kai Kankinen, Patrick Grönqvist, and Vesa Rantanen, were forced to make a horrible decision. They knew they couldn't reach their friends without risking their own lives, so they turned back. The return was long, silent, and suffocating. Swimming through hundreds of meters of submerged rock, each diver carried the knowledge that two of their team were gone, and they had to leave them behind. When they surfaced, they immediately alerted Norwegian authorities. Rescue divers were flown in from both Norway and the UK. Among them were some of the world's best, including members of the same team who would later rescue the trapped soccer team in Thailand. But after assessing the site, even they deemed the cave too dangerous. The authorities sealed it off and declared that the bodies could not be recovered safely. But the Finnish team refused to accept that answer. They knew the risks. They had already suffered unimaginable loss. But they also knew the cave, and more importantly, they knew their friends deserved to come home. Weeks later, after the ban was lifted, the surviving team members returned to Plura Cave and began preparing for the unthinkable. On March 26, 2014, in complete secrecy, the three men re-entered the cave. Their goal, recover the bodies of Jari Huotarinen and Jari Usimaki. It was an unauthorized operation, one that defied both the authorities and international rescue protocol. But it worked. They found both men in the narrow passage, still in place, still entangled in the gear that had cost them their lives. With enormous difficulty, they extracted them and brought them back to the surface. Against all odds, they succeeded. The story shocked the international diving world, not just because of the tragedy, but because of the sheer courage and loyalty it revealed. The recovery mission was later documented in the 2016 film Diving into the Unknown, which follows the surviving divers through their emotional return to Plura. Their mission was criticized by some, hailed by others, but ultimately seen as an extraordinary act of friendship and bravery. Their recovery dive was one of the boldest ever attempted, but in our next story, no recovery ever came. A diver vanished in a cave system with one way in and one way out, and yet, somehow, his body was never found. On the evening of August 18, 2010, 30-year-old Ben McDaniel walked down the wooden steps at Vortex Spring with full scuba gear strapped to his back. He signed in, suited up, and entered the crystal-clear waters. That much is certain. He never came back. Ben was on an extended break from life in Tennessee. After losing his younger brother to a stroke, seeing his business fail, and his relationship crumble, he had retreated to his parents' beach house in Florida to recover. During that time, he dove often. Vortex Spring became his sanctuary. He'd completed basic open water and advanced diver certifications, but he hadn't been formally trained or certified for cave diving, a key distinction that would later complicate the search for answers. Beneath Vortex Spring is a cave system stretching over 1,600 feet. Near the cave mouth sits a heavy metal gate bolted shut and chained, marked with a warning sign. "Stop! Prevent your death. Do not go beyond this point without proper training." The sign isn't just dramatic, it's necessary. More than 13 divers have died in the Vortex Spring Cave since the 1980s. Still, some divers with connections, or the right tools, have found ways past the gate. Ben was one of them. According to dive shop staff, Ben had been granted supervised access to parts of the cave and had made previous dives beyond the gate. He had shown interest in mapping unexplored sections and was said to be planning to apply for cave certification in the future. On August 18th, he dove alone. That night, his truck was found still parked near the entrance. His wallet, keys, and phone sat untouched inside. Staff assumed he was on a long dive, maybe testing new equipment or exploring again. But when he didn't surface by closing time, concern turned to alarm. The search that followed was unlike anything Vortex Spring had seen. Recovery divers combed through every accessible section of the cave. They went deep, risking their own lives to squeeze through narrow rock corridors, checking for signs of Ben. A pair of his fins and a diving slate were found near the gate, but no body, no mask, no tank, no trace. The assumption was simple. He had drowned and become wedged somewhere deeper in the system. But week after week, divers returned empty-handed. Even experts like world-renowned cave diver Ed Sorensen explored the area and concluded with eerie certainty, Ben isn't in there. That's when the rumors started. Some believed Ben had faked his death, disappeared to escape personal or financial troubles. Others speculated that he was caught in a collapse within a hidden part of the cave system that hadn't yet been charted. The most disturbing theory? That someone moved or disposed of his body to avoid legal repercussions, especially since untrained divers aren't supposed to be in the cave beyond the gate. The McDaniel family offered a $10,000 reward for any information about their son's whereabouts. Later, they increased it to $30,000. Still, nothing surfaced. No body, no witnesses, no dive logs with helpful entries. Just silence. Eventually, authorities ruled out foul play, but that did little to ease the pain or answer the core question. How can someone vanish in a place with only one entrance and one exit? The case attracted national media attention. It even inspired documentaries and podcast episodes. And yet, over a decade later, the mystery remains completely unsolved. No body, no final clue. Just a grieving family and a diving community left shaken. Today, Vortex Spring still operates as a recreational diving site, but behind the joy and clarity of its waters lies a silent, invisible weight. Somewhere in the labyrinth below, or perhaps somewhere else entirely, Ben McDaniel's story is still waiting for a final chapter. Each of these divers knew the risks. They trained, they prepared, they respected the depths. But in the most unforgiving environments on Earth, even a single mistake, a hidden variable, or a twist of bad luck is enough to turn precision into tragedy. If this video gave you chills, consider subscribing, because we're not done exploring what hides below the surface. Until next time, stay safe and never dive alone.